My name is Alex Martinez, and I've been delivering pizzas in Sacramento for 4 years. I know every street, every apartment complex, every shortcut in this city. I've delivered to crack houses at midnight, walked through gang territory with $100 in my pocket, and never felt scared. Pizza delivery isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills while I save money for college. I drive a beat-up Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it, and my phone's GPS is my best friend. But what happened in Alaska last August changed everything I thought I knew about being alone. I learned there are things out there that watch us, things that understand us better than we understand ourselves. I'd always wanted to try real backpacking, not just day hikes in California. I saved up for 8 months, bought all the gear, and planned a solo trip to Alaska. My friends thought I was crazy. "Alex, you deliver pizza for a living. You're not some mountain man." But I wanted to prove something to myself. I picked the Noatak National Preserve because hardly anyone goes there. No trails, no cell towers, no people for hundreds of miles. I flew into Anchorage, then took a small plane to Kotzebue. From there, a bush pilot dropped me off at a remote lake with 10 days of food and a plan to hike across empty tundra. The pilot said he'd pick me up at another lake 90 miles away. "You sure about this, kid?" he asked. "It's real empty out there." I told him I was sure. The first 2 days went perfect. The weather was clear, my gear worked great, and I felt proud of myself. I used my compass and GPS to navigate across the endless tundra. No trees, just low bushes, rocks, and sky that went on forever. It was beautiful and peaceful. At night, I'd set up my tent and take pictures of the sunset. I felt like a real adventurer. On the third day, something changed. I woke up feeling weird, like someone was watching me. You know that feeling when you're in a crowded place and someone's staring at you? It was exactly like that, but I was alone in the middle of nowhere. I looked around in all directions. Nothing but empty land as far as I could see. The feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. Every step I took, every time I stopped to drink water or check my map, I felt eyes on me. Not animal eyes. I'd seen caribou and Arctic foxes the first 2 days. This was different. This felt intelligent. This felt patient. I started taking pictures randomly, spinning around and snapping photos in all directions. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the isolation getting to me. But when I looked at the pictures on my camera screen that evening, my hands started shaking. In the background of 3 different photos, there was something on a distant hill. At first, I thought it was a rock or a bush. But when I zoomed in, it looked like a person. A really tall person, way too tall. And thin, like someone had stretched a normal person upward. I stared at those pictures for an hour. The figure was maybe half a mile away in each photo, but it was definitely there. And it was definitely watching me. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. The tent walls flapping in the wind sounded like footsteps. I kept my flashlight ready and checked outside every few hours, but I never saw anything. The next morning, I started taking pictures constantly. Every few minutes, I'd stop and take shots in all directions. I was trying to catch whatever was following me. The results made my stomach sick. The thing was always there, always watching. In photo after photo, I could see it on ridges, behind rocks, sometimes closer than before. And the closer pictures showed details that weren't human. Its arms hung down almost to the ground. Its legs were too long. Its head was too big and moved wrong, like it was looking around independent of the body. When I moved, it moved. When I stopped, it stopped. When I changed direction, within minutes, it would reposition itself to keep watching me. I tried an experiment. I hiked toward a hill where I'd seen it in photos. As I got closer, I kept taking pictures of that spot. In each photo, the figure got fainter, like it was backing away but staying the same distance from me. When I stopped and turned around, I took a photo behind me. There it was again, on a different hill now. This thing was smart. It knew what I was doing and stayed just far enough away to avoid me getting a clear look. But my camera was seeing it perfectly. On the 5th day, I could see it with my naked eyes. A dark shape standing motionless on distant hills, watching, always watching. When I waved, it didn't wave back. When I yelled, it didn't move. But when I walked, it followed. I wasn't eating much. I couldn't sleep. My hands shook when I tried to use my compass. I kept looking over my shoulder every few steps. The thing never came closer than about 100 yards, but its presence was crushing me mentally. The worst part was the intelligence. This wasn't some curious animal. It was studying me, learning my patterns. I'd set up camp, and within an hour, I'd see it positioned on a hill where it could watch my tent. I'd pack up and move, and it would adjust its position to follow. One night, I tried to trick it. I set up my tent in an open area, but I actually slept hidden behind some rocks 200 yards away. I set my camera to take pictures automatically all night. The next morning, the photos showed the figure approaching my empty tent around midnight. It stood right next to the tent for hours, somehow knowing I wasn't inside. Then it started searching in circles until it found where I was really sleeping. By dawn, it was on a hill overlooking my hiding spot. How did it track me? I left no trail on the hard tundra ground. The wind scattered my scent. But somehow, this thing knew exactly where I was at all times. Day 7. I was falling apart. I wasn't thinking clearly. I kept talking to myself just to hear a human voice, and I had the horrible feeling that the thing was listening to everything I said, learning about me. I could see it clearly now during the day, at least 8 feet tall, maybe 9, thin like a skeleton. Its head moved constantly, scanning back and forth like a radar dish. Its arms swayed slightly as it stood like they were too heavy for its body. When I stopped to rest, it stopped. When I ate, it watched. When I took pictures, it stayed perfectly still like it was posing. This had become a game to it, and I was losing. On day 8, I broke. I activated my emergency beacon. I didn't care about finishing my adventure or proving anything to myself. I just wandered away from that thing. The beacon's GPS showed my location, and the rescue service said a helicopter would come in 6 hours. I had to wait at a flat spot suitable for landing. As soon as I reached the pickup zone, the figure positioned itself on a ridge where it could watch everything. For 6 hours, it watched me wait. I took dozens of pictures. In every single one, there it was, standing like a monument on that ridge, waiting and watching. When I heard the helicopter coming, I looked up at the ridge. The figure was gone, completely vanished. I spun around, taking pictures in all directions, but it had disappeared like it had never existed. The rescue crew landed and loaded me up. I was babbling about being followed, showing them pictures on my camera. They looked at the photos and went quiet. The pilot radioed back to base and talked in codes I didn't understand. Back in Kotzebue, a Park Service investigator interviewed me. I showed him all my pictures. He studied them for a long time, then made some phone calls. Finally, he sat down and said, "You're not the first person to see this." He told me 12 other hikers had reported similar encounters in remote Alaska over the past 5 years. Always the same description: extremely tall, thin figure that watches from a distance. Never aggressive, never approaches, just watches and follows. "What is it?" I asked. He shrugged. "We don't know. Fish and Wildlife says it's not a known animal. Anthropologists say it's not matching any human behavior patterns. Some researchers think it might be something that evolved separately, adapted to life in the empty places where humans rarely go." Then he said something that made my blood freeze. 3 of the people who reported these encounters came back to Alaska for return trips. All 3 disappeared. We found their campsites, their gear, everything intact, but no sign of them. I flew home the next day. The pictures are still on my camera. I've showed them to wildlife experts, photography specialists, even paranormal investigators. Everyone agrees the figure is real, not a camera trick or natural formation. But here's what really scares me. Last month, I got a letter from the National Park Service. They want me to come back to Alaska as part of a research team studying these encounters. They're offering good money. I won't go. I can't go. Because I know that thing is still out there in the empty places, watching and waiting. It learned about me during those days in the tundra. It knows how I move, how I think, how I react when I'm scared. And sometimes, when I'm driving late-night deliveries through the empty parts of Sacramento, I get that same feeling I had in Alaska, That feeling of being watched by something that understands me better than I understand myself. I check my mirrors constantly now. I take different routes home every night. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see a tall, dark shape standing motionless in my peripheral vision. But when I turn to look directly, nothing's there. Just like in Alaska. My name is Jenny Martinez, and I'm 24 years old. I work as a cashier at Target in Denver, Colorado. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills while I save up for the things I really want to do. I've been working there for 3 years now, scanning barcodes and dealing with customers all day long. The pay isn't great, but I'm good with money and I always put aside whatever I can. For months, I had been saving every extra dollar for something special, my first solo trip. I'd never traveled anywhere by myself before, and I wanted to do something big. Something that would prove to myself that I was brave and independent. After looking at tons of travel websites, I decided on Alaska. It seemed like the perfect place for an adventure. Wild, beautiful, and completely different from Denver. I planned a simple 4-day hiking trip in Chugach State Park just outside Anchorage. Nothing too crazy since I wasn't an experienced hiker. Just some easy trails, camping under the stars, and taking lots of pictures. I bought all the gear I needed: a good tent, sleeping bag, hiking boots, and a big backpack. I watched YouTube videos about camping and hiking safety until I felt ready. I was so excited about the trip that I posted about it everywhere on social media. Instagram, Facebook, even TikTok. I shared pictures of my new gear, maps of the trails I wanted to hike, and countdown posts leading up to my departure date. Solo adventure to Alaska, I wrote. 4 days in the wilderness. Can't wait to disconnect and explore. All my friends were commenting how brave I was and how jealous they were. I felt so proud and adventurous. Looking back now, those posts were the biggest mistake of my life. The flight to Anchorage was my first time flying alone, and I felt so adult and independent. I picked up my rental car and drove straight to Chugach State Park. The MAU contains were incredible, bigger and more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen in person. I found the trailhead for my first day's hike and started walking into the wilderness with my backpack full of supplies. The trail was well marked and not too difficult. Pine trees everywhere, fresh mountain air, and the sound of birds I'd never heard before. I stopped every few minutes to take pictures and post them online. Day 1 in paradise, I captioned a selfie with the mountains behind me. I felt like I was living my best life. About 2 miles into the hike, I noticed something attached to a tree trunk. It was a trail camera, the kind wildlife researchers use to study animals. The camera was zip-tied to the tree about 8 feet up, with a clear view of the hiking trail. At first, I thought it was cool. Maybe I'd end up in some nature documentary if a bear or moose walked by. But when I looked at it more carefully, something felt wrong. The camera wasn't pointing at animal paths or feeding areas like it should be. It was aimed directly at the hiking trail, right where people would walk. The angle was perfect for filming hikers, not wildlife. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think too much about it. Maybe the researchers wanted to count how many people used the trail. I even took a selfie next to it and posted it on Instagram with the caption, "Even the bears have security cameras here." My friends back home thought it was hilarious. That night, I set up my tent at a designated camping area about 5 miles from the trailhead. It was a beautiful spot near a small stream, surrounded by tall trees. I cooked dinner on my camp stove and watched the sun set behind the mountains. This was exactly what I'd dreamed about during all those months of saving money and planning. As I was brushing my teeth before bed, I noticed another camera mounted on a tree at the edge of the camp. Ping area. This one was aimed directly at the spot where people would pitch their tents. A small red light blinked every few seconds, showing it was actively recording. This camera looked expensive, professional-grade equipment with a weatherproof housing and a small solar panel for power. Someone had put serious money into this setup. I walked over to get a closer look and saw it was the same brand as the one on the trail. The camera was recording everything. People setting up camp, cooking dinner, getting ready for bed. I felt uncomfortable being filmed while camping. This was supposed to be my private wilderness experience. I took my bandana and tied it over the camera lens, then moved my tent to a different spot about 50 yards away where I couldn't see the blinking red light. The next morning I woke up and walked back to where the camera was. My bandana was lying on the ground beneath the tree, and the red light was blinking again. Someone had removed the bandana during the night and turned the camera back on. That gave me chills. It meant someone had been here while I was sleeping, walking around my campsite in the dark. But I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just a park ranger checking the equipment. There had to be a reasonable explanation. I packed up my gear and continued on the trail system, planning to spend 2 more nights camping before heading back to Anchorage. But as I hiked, I started noticing more cameras. A lot more. Every time I stopped to rest, every water source, every scenic viewpoint, there was always a camera watching. Not hidden, but not obvious either. They were placed at natural eye level, disguised as normal trail equipment. By the end of the second day, I had counted 15 different cameras along the trail system. What really bothered me was their placement. Each camera was positioned at spots where solo female hikers would naturally spend time. Rest areas, water sources, secluded camping spots. Places where a woman hiking alone would stop to eat lunch, filter water, or change clothes. I started taking pictures of each camera location with my phone, documenting what was clearly not a normal wildlife research project. This was something else entirely. Something that made my stomach feel sick every time I thought about it. On my final day, hiking back toward the trailhead, I found something that made my blood freeze in my veins. There was another trail camera, but this one had a small plastic bag taped to the tree beneath it. Inside the bag were printed photographs, dozens of them. The photos showed me sleeping in my tent the night before, pictures of me changing clothes behind trees, thinking I had privacy. Images of me squatting behind bushes to use the bathroom. Someone had been watching me through night vision cameras and printing out the most private, vulnerable moments of my trip. But there were other photos too. Pictures of different women from previous months. All young, all hiking alone, all photographed without their knowledge. Some photos were taken with telephoto lenses from hidden positions, showing women bathing in streams or changing clothes in their tents. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the pictures. This wasn't wildlife research. This was a sick person stalking and photographing women in the wilderness. Then I saw a face I recognized. Amy Rodriguez, a 26-year-old teacher from Phoenix whose missing person flyers I'd seen posted around Anchorage. She had disappeared in this same area 3 months earlier. Amy's photos told a horrible story. They started with normal hiking shots just like mine. Then pictures of her looking scared and confused. Then images of her running through the forest, terror on her face. The photos got worse from there. Close-ups of her crying, her hands tied behind her back, tape over her mouth. The final photo of Amy had a timestamp from the day she was reported missing. It showed her tied up in what looked like a base knot, with tears streaming down her face. I was looking at evidence of kidnapping, assault, and possibly murder, all documented like a sick photo collection. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate my phone camera, but I managed to take pictures of the evidence. I had to get this to the police. These photos could help find Amy and catch whoever was doing this. That's when I heard footsteps crashing through the brush behind me. Someone was coming through the forest, moving fast and heading straight for my location. Heavy boots on fallen leaves, branches snapping under weight, getting closer every second. I shoved my phone in my pocket and ran as hard as I could back toward the trailhead, abandoning my heavy backpack. All I cared about was getting out of the wilderness alive with the evidence on my phone. Behind me, I could hear someone chasing me through the forest. Not trying to be quiet anymore, just crashing through the trees and gaining ground. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, they stopped too, like they were playing some kind of sick game with me. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like rubber, but I kept running. The trailhead parking lot was still 2 miles away, and I didn't know if I could make it without collapsing. When I finally reached the parking lot, my heart sank. My rental car had all 4 tires slashed and every window smashed. Glass was scattered everywhere, and my luggage from the trunk was dumped on the ground. Spray painted across my windshield in bright red paint were the words, "You're in the collection now, Jenny from Denver." He knew my name. He knew where I was from. Everything I had posted on social media about my trip had been used to identify and target me. I was trapped in the middle of nowhere with no transportation and a predator who had been planning my abduction for months. My phone had no signal this far from town, so I couldn't even call for help. I hid in the forest near the parking lot for 6 hours, too terrified to move, watching for any sign of other people. Every sound made me jump. Was it a squirrel or someone coming to grab me? When another hiker finally arrived at the parking lot around sunset, I came out of hiding and begged him to call 911. I was crying and shaking so hard I could barely speak, but I managed to explain that I needed police immediately and that I had evidence of multiple kidnappings. The hiker, an older man named Bill, stayed with me until Alaska State Troopers arrived. He probably saved my life by being there. I don't think my stalker would have tried anything with a witness present. The troopers took my report very seriously. They'd been investigating several missing hiker cases in the area, including Amy Rodriguez. When I showed them the photos on my phone and the GPS locations of all the cameras I'd documented, they organized an immediate search operation. Within 24 hours, they had found all the cameras I'd reported, plus 30 more hidden throughout the trail system. The network covered over 50 square miles of wilderness, all focused on monitoring solo female hikers. At the location where I'd found the photographs, investigators discovered something even worse: a camouflaged bunker built into the hillside. It was stocked with surveillance equipment, computers, and thousands of printed photographs covering every inch of the walls. The bunker was like a gallery of horror. Hundreds of women photographed without their knowledge or consent. Detailed files on each victim with names, addresses, daily routines, and family information, all gathered from social media posts just like mine. The files included what he called hunting plans, maps showing where each woman would be most vulnerable to abduction, notes about their hiking experience and physical fitness, and scheduled times when they would be alone and isolated. Computer equipment in the bunker contained videos that I can't even describe. Women being assaulted, tortures, and killed, all filmed in a basement location that investigators hadn't found yet. DNA evidence from the bunker led to the arrest of Marcus Webb, a 34-year-old IT technician who installed internet infrastructure in remote areas around Alaska. His job gave him perfect access to set up illegal surveillance networks, powered by the same satellite systems he was hired to install for legitimate customers. Webb had been using dating apps and social media to identify solo female travelers, then tracking their movements through his camera network. He would study their posts for weeks before they arrived, learning their routines and planning their abductions. Police found the basement torture chamber in Webb's house in Anchorage, along with personal belongings from 12 missing women. Amy Rodriguez's teacher ID badge was in a box with items from 11 other victims. The investigation revealed that Webb had been selling the surveillance footage and torture videos on dark websites for thousands of dollars. He had customers all over the world who paid premium prices for custom content, requesting specific types of torture and murder methods. Webb's computer contained purchase orders from buyers who would pay up to $50,000 for videos of specific victim types being killed in specific ways. He was taking requests like he was running a business. I learned that my Instagram posts had made me a target 2 months before my trip. Webb had screenshots of every photo I'd posted, maps of my planned hiking routes, and notes about my work schedule and home address in Denver. During Webb's trial, prosecutors revealed he had made over $300,000 selling footage of women being stalked, abducted, tortured, and murdered. His customers included people from 12 different countries who shared his videos on private networks. I testified against him and helped convict him on 12 counts of first-degree murder, plus human trafficking, production of torture pornography, and dozens of other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the damage was already done. 12 women were dead because they posted travel plans on social media just like I did. Their families will never see them again because a predator used their own excitement and social media posts to hunt them down like animals. I survived because another hiker showed up at the right time and because I got lucky. Amy Rodriguez and the other victims weren't so lucky. Now I never post travel plans on social media until after I'm safely home. I warn other women that predators are using our own posts to target us, learning our routines and finding us when we're most vulnerable. Every time I see someone posting their vacation plans online, I want to scream. They don't realize they might be signing their own death warrant by telling the world exactly where they'll be and when they'll be alone. That 4-day trip to Alaska taught me that the most dangerous predators aren't bears or wolves. They're people who use technology and social media to turn our own excitement against us. The wilderness isn't scary because of wild animals. It's terrifying because it's the perfect place for monsters wearing human faces to make people disappear forever. My name is Lisa Chen, and I've been working as a waitress at Applebee's in Portland for 3 years. It's not glamorous, but the tips are decent, and I've always been good with people. What really drives me, though, is photography. Every spare dollar from my shifts goes toward camera gear and saving for trips to places where I can capture something amazing. I've been dreaming of Alaska since I was a kid, watching nature documentaries. The wild landscapes, the untouched forests, the wildlife. It seemed like photographer heaven. For 2 years, I scraped together every tip, worked double shifts on weekends, and ate ramen for dinner more nights than I care to admit. Finally, I had enough saved for a week-long solo trip to the Tongass National Forest. I planned everything perfectly. October was hunting season, which actually made me feel safer. I figured having other people in the woods meant I wouldn't be completely alone out there. I bought all the right gear: bright orange vest, whistle, GPS device, professional camera equipment. I researched the trails, got my permits, and even took a wilderness survival course at the local community college. The plan was simple: hike deep into the forest, set up camp at different spots each night, and photograph the autumn landscape and wildlife. I'd been camping before, just never somewhere this remote, but I was confident in my preparation and excited to finally make this dream happen. The flight to Ketchikan was smooth, and renting the Jeep went without a hitch. The drive to the forest entrance took about 2 hours through some of the most beautiful scenery I'd ever seen. Towering spruce trees lined the road, and mountains disappeared into low-hanging clouds. I started hiking early on my first day, October 15th. The weather was perfect, crisp but not cold, with just enough cloud cover to create dramatic lighting for photos. My pack felt heavy with all my camera equipment, but I was too excited to care. The trail was well marked at first, winding through dense forest that felt ancient and untouched. By afternoon, I'd reached my planned campsite about 8 miles in. It was a small clearing next to a creek, exactly like the pictures I'd seen online. I set up my tent, hung my food properly to avoid bears, and spent the evening taking photos of the golden light filtering through the trees. That first night was magical. I fell asleep to the sound of the creek and woke up feeling more refreshed than I had in months. This was exactly what I'd needed: just me, nature, and my camera. On my second day, I hiked deeper into the forest, following a less-traveled trail that promised better wildlife photography opportunities. The woods were quiet, except for the occasional bird call and the sound of my boots on the forest floor. That's when I heard the first gunshots. They were distant, probably a mile or 2 away, but definitely gunshots. I checked my GPS. I was well within the legal hunting area, and it was deer and moose season. I made sure my orange vest was visible and started making more noise as I walked, calling out, "Hello!" every few minutes like the safety guides recommended. The shots continued sporadically throughout the day. Sometimes single shots, sometimes 2 or 3 in quick succession. Normal hunting behavior, I told myself. Hunters taking their shots at game. That afternoon, I came across something that made me stop in my tracks. It was a gut pile. The remains left behind when hunters field dress their kill. But something about it looked wrong. I've seen gut piles before during hunting season back in Oregon. My uncle used to take me deer hunting when I was younger, and I knew what normal field dressing looked like. This wasn't it. The cuts were too precise, too clean, like they'd been matte with surgical instruments instead of a hunting knife. And only specific organs had been removed. The heart, liver, and kidneys were gone, but other parts that hunters usually take were left behind. It looked more like a biology class dissection than someone preparing meat for eating. Carved into a nearby tree were symbols I'd never seen before. They weren't trail markers or the kind of tags hunters usually leave. These looked almost ritualistic. Complex geometric patterns with lines radiating out like a sun, but darker somehow. They gave me an uneasy feeling that I couldn't shake. I photographed everything, thinking maybe it was evidence of poaching. The symbols might help identify who was responsible. But as I looked through my camera lens at those markings, I felt like I was documenting something I shouldn't have found. I packed up quickly and hiked to my planned campsite for the second night. But I couldn't stop thinking about those symbols and the surgical precision of those cuts. That night, everything changed. I was in my sleeping bag, editing photos on my camera's LCD screen, when I heard the first shot. It was close, maybe half a mile away. Then another shot, from a different direction, then another. Over the next 3 hours, I counted 23 shots total. But they weren't random. They were moving in a pattern around my campsite, like someone was systematically shooting at different points in a circle around me. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing. The shots never got closer than what I estimated was about 100 yards away, but they never got farther either. Someone was shooting in a perfect circle around my tent, and they had to know exactly where I was to do that. When morning came, I forced myself to investigate. What I found made my blood run cold. Bullet holes in trees, all at chest height, all exactly 100 yards from my tent in every direction. Fresh bark scattered on the ground, the wood inside still white and clean. Someone had spent hours the night before, shooting around my campsite with mathematical precision. And they hadn't been trying to hit me. They'd been showing me that they could have if they wanted to. I packed up my gear so fast I forgot to properly roll my sleeping bag. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, but I was 8 miles from the trailhead with at least a full day's hike ahead of me, and whoever had done this might be watching the trails. Instead, I decided to hike to a completely different area, following a creek bed to avoid the main trails. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every crack of a branch, every bird call made me jump. My new campsite was in a small clearing about 3 miles from where I'd been, hidden behind a stand of thick spruce trees. I thought I'd found a safe spot, somewhere random where no one could have predicted I'd go. I was wrong. More symbols were carved into the trees around the clearing. Fresh carvings, the sap still sticky and running down the bark. And arranged around the base of the trees were animal bones, deer ribs, what looked like a moose skull. Smaller bones I couldn't identify. They were placed in patterns that reminded me of the carved symbols, like someone had been using this clearing for ceremonies. These weren't Native American markings. I'd researched the cultural history of the area before my trip, and none of this matched traditional practices. These symbols looked more like something from a horror movie, occult-like designs that made my skin crawl just looking at them. I started photographing everything compulsively, documenting what was clearly some kind of illegal activity happening in the forest. My hands were shaking as I adjusted my camera settings, but I forced myself to get clear shots of every symbol, every bone arrangement. As the afternoon wore on, I heard voices in the distance. Not shouting or normal conversation, but something that sounded almost like singing or chanting. The voices were coming from deeper in the forest, and despite every rational part of my brain screaming at me to run, I found myself following the sound. I needed to know what was happening out there, and I needed evidence if I was going to report this to the authorities. The chanting led me to a clearing about half a mile away, hidden so deep in the forest that you'd never find it unless you knew exactly where to look. I crept to the edge and hid behind a fallen log, pulling out my camera with the telephoto lens. What I saw through that lens will haunt me for the rest of my life. 20 people stood around a large fire, all wearing expensive hunting gear, the kind that costs thousands of dollars. But they also wore masks made from animal skulls. Deer, moose, what looked like a bear skull with the jaw still attached. They moved in coordinated patterns around the fire, chanting in a language I'd never heard. Mixed in with the deer and moose bones around their fire were human skulls, and what looked like fresh human remains. I took photo after photo, my camera clicking softly as I captured image after image of this nightmare. These weren't normal hunters. This was some kind of cult using hunting season as cover for something far worse. That's when one of them spotted the reflection off my camera lens. He pointed directly at my hiding spot and let out a whistle that sounded like a bird call. But the others responded immediately, spreading out from the clearing in organized groups. They weren't panicking or confused. This was practiced, coordinated. They were hunting me. I ran through the forest like I'd never run before, crashing through brush and jumping over fallen logs. But I could hear them behind me, and they weren't just chasing randomly. They were herding me, forcing me to go in a specific direction by cutting off other routes. Whenever I tried to turn left, I'd hear a whistle from that direction and have to go right. When I tried to double back, voices would call out behind me, pushing me forward, the tadta. They were treating me exactly like hunters drive game animals, controlling where I went instead of just catching me. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, I found myself in another clearing, and I understood why they'd been herding me there. It was their kill site. An altar made of stacked human skulls sat in the center of the clearing. Human bones hung from the trees like decorations, tied with rope and swaying gently in the breeze. Medieval-looking torture devices were arranged around the space. Racks, spikes, cutting tools that looked like they belonged in a museum of horrors. I hid behind another fallen log and watched as more cult members arrived. At least 20 people total, all carrying high-end hunting rifles and wearing those horrible skull masks. That's when I heard them talking and learned the truth about what they were doing. "Perfect prey," one of them said, his voice muffled by the deer skull mask he wore. "We've been tracking her for 3 days. She's got good survival instincts." "The clients are going to love this one," another replied. "She's put up more of a fight than the last two." They called it the ultimate safari, hunting humans instead of animals, because people could understand fear and beg for mercy. These were wealthy people who paid enormous amounts of money for the privilege of hunting humans in remote Alaska, where gunshots during hunting season wouldn't attract any attention from authorities. They'd been doing this for years, I realized. That's what all those carved symbols meant, what those bone arrangements were for. This was their hunting ground, and they'd been using it to torture and kill people for sport. I heard them planning to give me a 30-minute head start before releasing the hunters to track and kill me. The ceremony would involve torturing me slowly while filming it for other wealthy clients who couldn't attend in person. While they prepared their ritual, I quietly moved through the forest toward where I'd seen them come from. There had to be vehicles, this equipment, and these people hadn't walked 20 miles into the wilderness. I found them parked on a hidden service road I'd never seen on any map. 5 expensive ATVs and a luxury RV that must have cost more than I make in 5 years. This was how they'd accessed this remote area without anyone noticing. I used my pocket knife to slash all their tires and cut every brake line I could find, trying to trap them the same way they were trapping me. In their RV, I found video equipment, more torture devices, and recorded footage of previous hunts. Dozens of tapes were labeled with victims' names and dates, going back 5 years, a library of murder for entertainment. I also found contracts and payment records showing clients paid $50,000 each to participate in hunting and killing humans. I photographed everything with my camera, knowing I needed evidence if I survived to report this to police. But I could hear them coming back toward the vehicles. I hid in thick brush and waited. When they discovered their sabotaged vehicles, they became enraged and started hunting me more aggressively, this time with tracking dogs. I ran toward the main trail system, doing everything I could remember from survival shows to confuse their dogs. I waded through streams, climbed trees, and jumped to different ones, even rubbed myself with wild mint to mask my scent. The sounds of the dogs and their handlers followed me all night, sometimes getting closer, sometimes fading away. But I kept moving, using my GPS to navigate toward the ranger station I knew was about 15 miles away. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted, dehydrated, and covered in cuts and bruises. But I could see the ranger station ahead through the trees. I stumbled through the door and collapsed on the floor, gasping out a request to call 911. The ranger, a woman in her 50s named Sarah, took one look at me and immediately got on her radio. Within 4 hours, Alaska state troopers and FBI agents were gearing up for a raid. I gave them the GPS coordinates of the cult camp and turned over my camera with all the evidence I'd photographed. The raid was successful. They arrested 18 people and found remains of at least 15 victims buried around the ritual site, plus video evidence of torture and murder going back years. The investigation revealed that the cult had been advertising their human safari experiences to wealthy psychopaths through dark web networks. Clients paid enormous fees to hunt, torture, and kill people in remote Alaska where no one would find the victims. I testified at their trials and helped convict the entire group. Most received life sentences without possibility of parole. The FBI told me that my photographs and testimony were crucial to building their case, but the nightmares never stopped. I still wake up in a cold sweat, feeling like I'm being hunted through those dark woods. I can't go camping anymore, can't even walk alone in the forest preserve near my apartment. The sound of gunshots during hunting season makes me physically sick. I quit my job at Applebee's and moved across the country to Florida, as far from those Alaska forests as I could get. I still do photography, but only in cities now, only around lots of people. The worst part is knowing how close I came to becoming just another tape in their collection. Another victim whose death would be entertainment for rich psychopaths who see human life as nothing more than sport. Sometimes I wonder if there are other groups like them out there, other remote places where people disappear and no one ever finds out why. The FBI assured me they'd investigated thoroughly, but Alaska is a big state with a lot of wilderness. If you ever go hiking alone in remote areas, especially during hunting season, ASIN, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, get out immediately. Don't try to be brave or get evidence like I did. Just run, because sometimes the most dangerous predators in the Balsa wilderness aren't animals at all. They're people who've decided that hunting humans is the ultimate thrill, and they'll do anything to protect their sick game. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've been working as a secretary at Henderson Associates law firm in Chicago for 5 years now. I handle case files, schedule client meetings, and keep track of court dates. It's steady work, and after my messy breakup with Derek earlier that year, I needed something stable in my life. But what happened during my solo trip to Alaska in September changed everything I thought I knew about trust and safety. I'd been planning this backpacking trip for months. After Derek cheated on me with his coworker, I needed to prove to myself that I could do something brave and independent. I chose Gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska because it's one of the most remote places in America. You can hike for days without seeing another person. That sounded perfect to me at the time. I flew into Fairbanks on September 15th and took a small plane to the park entrance. The weather was already getting cold, with temperatures dropping to near freezing at night. I packed everything I thought I'd need. A good tent, sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, enough food for 7 days, water purification tablets, and most importantly, my emergency beacon. The park ranger who checked me in made sure I understood that cell phone coverage was non-existent out there, and that beacon was my only lifeline if something went wrong. The first 2 days were incredible. The landscape was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Endless mountains, crystal clear streams, and a silence so complete it felt like being on another planet. I felt strong and capable, exactly what I'd hoped for. I was finally proving to myself that I didn't need Derek or anyone else. But on the third day, everything went wrong in the worst possible way. I was crossing a steep section where loose rocks covered the trail. My hiking boots had good grip, but one rock shifted under my weight. My ankle twisted, I lost my balance, and I fell hard backward. My head slammed into a boulder with a crack that echoed through the valley. When I woke up, the world was spinning. My head felt like someone was driving nails into my skull, and I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there. Blood was trickling down my forehead, and every time I tried to stand up, waves of nausea knocked me back down. I'd never had a concussion before, but I knew this was bad. Really bad. In the wilderness, a head injury like this could kill you. I managed to crawl to my backpack and activate my emergency beacon with shaking hands. The little red light started blinking, sending out distress signals to rescue services. All I could do was sit there in the dirt, holding my throbbing head, and pray that someone would find me before I passed out again. 4 hours later, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Helicopter rotors echoing off the mountains. Relief flooded through me as the aircraft appeared over the ridge and started circling for a landing spot. Help was coming. I was going to be okay. The helicopter touched down about 50 yards from where I sat, and 3 people in clean medical uniforms jumped out. They had official-looking patches on their jackets and carried professional medical equipment: oxygen tanks, IV bags, a portable stretcher. The leader, a tall man with gray hair, introduced himself as Dr. Morrison. "Don't worry, Sarah," he said, somehow knowing my name. "We're part of a wilderness medical research team. We monitor emergency beacons in remote areas to study trauma treatment methods." That made sense to my confused brain. Of course they'd know my name from the beacon registration. They immediately started treating my head injury with the kind of equipment I'd expect to see in a real hospital. They cleaned my wound, checked my pupils with a flashlight, and asked me questions to test my memory. "You have a moderate concussion," Dr. Morrison explained as his team set up an IV line. "We're going to give you some fluids and pain medication to help with the symptoms." The IV made me feel amazing. The crushing headache faded to a dull ache, and the nausea disappeared completely. These people clearly knew what they were doing, and I was grateful for their expertise. "Your injury is actually perfect for our research on brain trauma in wilderness settings," Dr. Morrison continued. "Would you be willing to volunteer for our study? It would mean more comprehensive medical care and monitoring." In my confused state from the concussion, that sounded reasonable. Better medical care meant a better recovery, right? I signed some papers they handed me, though the words seemed blurry and hard to focus on. "We'll take you to our research facility for advanced treatment," Dr. Morrison said as they loaded me onto their stretcher. "It's much better equipped than the nearest hospital." They carried me to their helicopter, and I dozed off during the flight, feeling safe and cared for. But when I woke up, something was very wrong. We weren't at a hospital. We were at some kind of isolated compound surrounded by high concrete walls topped with razor wire. The buildings looked more like a prison than a medical facility. Guard towers stood at each corner, and armed security personnel patrolled the perimeter. "Where are we?" I asked as they wheeled me inside on a gurney. "Our research facility," Dr. Morrison replied. But his tone had changed. It was colder now, more clinical. "Don't worry about the security measures. We handle very sensitive research here." The inside was even worse. Instead of normal hospital rooms, I saw holding cells with thick metal doors and small windows. The hallways were lined with operating rooms filled with equipment that looked designed for torture rather than healing. Restraint tables, electrical devices, and surgical tools that seemed far too elaborate for treating a simple concussion. They wheeled me into one of these rooms and transferred me to a metal table. That's when I realized I was strapped down with thick leather restraints around my wrists, ankles, and chest. IVs were connected to both arms, and they'd attached electrodes to my head. "What's happening?" I demanded as the medication started wearing off and my mind cleared. "Why am I tied down?" Dr. Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm afraid we weren't entirely honest about our research, Sarah. We're not studying wilderness trauma treatment. We're testing experimental brain surgery techniques and new psychiatric medications." My blood turned to ice water. "What are you talking about?" "Remote areas like where we found you provide perfect test subjects," he explained casually, like he was discussing the weather. "When hikers go missing in the wilderness, search and rescue teams assume they got lost or had accidents. No one looks for illegal research facilities." He gestured to a wall covered with filing cabinets. "We have files on hundreds of test subjects we've collected over the years from wilderness areas across Alaska, Montana, and Colorado. Your head injury was just convenient. It gave us a medical excuse to bring you here." I pulled against the restraints, but they were too strong. "You can't do this. People know where I am." "Actually, they don't," Dr. Morrison said. "Your emergency beacon stopped transmitting when we picked you up. As far as anyone knows, you're still missing in the wilderness." He opened one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder. "Let me show you what we're working on here, Sarah." Some of our subjects ended up in these autopsy reports after we tested the upper limits of brain surgery survival rates. Others, he flipped through pages covered with photos and medical notes, suffered permanent brain damage and psychological destruction from our psychiatric drug trials. The photos were horrifying. People with shaved heads and surgical scars, their eyes empty and unfocused. Others strapped to tables like I was, with wires and tubes connected to their bodies. At the bottom of each page was a stamp: terminated, subject expired, or terminated, subject compromised. We're developing mind-control drugs and surgical procedures, Dr. Morrison continued. Our clients include military contractors, foreign governments, and pharmaceutical companies who need testing that would be impossible to conduct legally. I felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with my concussion. You're monsters. We're scientists, he corrected. The team here includes former doctors who lost their licenses for pushing ethical boundaries, and foreign researchers working without government oversight. We've been kidnapping injured hikers and using them for medical experiments for over a decade. He walked over to a surgical tray and started laying out instruments: scalpels, bone saws, and devices I didn't recognize but looked designed to cause pain. Today we're going to test a new procedure for memory and personality alteration. We'll be removing part of your frontal lobe while you're conscious so we can monitor your responses as we destroy different parts of your brain. I yanked against the restraints so hard my wrist started bleeding. Please, you don't have to do this. Actually, we do. Our clients are very specific about the data they need. He picked up a syringe filled with clear liquid. This will keep you awake and aware during the surgery, but paralyzed so you can't move. We need to see how the brain reacts to trauma in real time. As he approached with the syringe, I worked my right hand frantically against the restraint. The leather was old and had stretched slightly from previous subjects struggling against it. I dislocated my thumb with a pop of pain and managed to slip my hand free just as Dr. Morrison leaned over me. I grabbed a scalpel from his surgical tray and slashed at his face. He screamed and stumbled backward, blood streaming from a deep cut across his cheek. I cut the restraints on my other hand and legs, then rolled off the table. "Security!" Dr. Morrison shouted into his radio as I fought my way toward the door. "Subject has escaped from operating room 3. I ran into the hallway, clutching the scalpel, but I had no idea which way led to an exit. The compound was like a maze with corridors branching off in all directions. I could hear boots running and radios crackling as security teams mobilized to find me. I ducked into the first room I found, which turned out to be a morgue. Dozens of bodies lay on metal tables, all showing signs of the experiments Dr. Morrison had described. Brain surgery scars, missing organs, and surgical incisions that had been sewn up carelessly. These people had died in agony, used as test subjects for procedures that would never help anyone. In the corner, I found their communication equipment, a radio setup connected to outside emergency frequencies. I started broadcasting distress calls on every channel I could find. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Sarah Martinez broadcasting from an illegal medical facility in Alaska. They're conducting human experiments on kidnapped civilians. Please send help immediately." I kept repeating the message even as I heard security guards searching the rooms around me. They needed me alive and undamaged for their experiments, which meant they couldn't just shoot me. That gave me a small advantage, but I knew it wouldn't last long. After 20 minutes of broadcasting, I heard real helicopters approaching, multiple aircraft, not just the fake medical team that had kidnapped me. Through the morgue window, I could see FBI tactical teams rappelling down from black helicopters. The compound erupted in chaos as federal agents stormed through the gates. Dr. Morrison and his team tried to destroy evidence, but they were overwhelmed within minutes. I kept broadcasting my location until an FBI agent found me in the morgue, surrounded by the bodies of their victims. The raid uncovered one of the largest illegal human experimentation operations in U.S. history. They found records of over 200 test subjects who had been abducted from remote areas across multiple states. The operation was funded by defense contractors, developing mind control techniques, biological weapons, and surgical procedures for military applications. Many subjects had been driven insane by psychological torture disguised as psychiatric research. Others had been deliberately infected with diseases to test experimental treatments. Some had endured surgical procedures designed to test pain tolerance and methods for extracting information through torture. My case became the centerpiece of what the media called the Alaska Human Testing Program. I testified before Congress about being used as a human guinea pig by people who saw civilians as expendable test subjects. Dr. Morrison and 12 other researchers were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But I know similar operations continue in other remote locations. There are people out there who view human beings as laboratory animals to be used and discarded for profit. The head injury from my fall healed completely within a month, but the psychological trauma from nearly being used for brain experiments still affects me every day. I carry multiple emergency beacons now and always tell several people exactly where I'm going and when I'll return. The experience taught me that some of the most evil experiments aren't happening in foreign countries or secret government facilities. They're happening to American citizens in our own wilderness areas, carried out by people who exploit our trust in medical professionals and our faith that help will come when we need it most. I still work at the law firm, but I'll never take another solo trip into the wilderness. Because now I know that when you're alone and injured in a remote place, the people who come to rescue you might be the most dangerous threat of all. My name is Tom Mitchell, and I've been a UPS delivery driver in Seattle for 8 years. I know every street corner, every apartment complex, and every business from downtown to the suburbs. I've delivered packages in snowstorms, heat waves, and during power outages. My coworkers always said I was good at my job, but they also said I was too dependent on others. I never went anywhere alone. Not to movies, not to dinner, definitely not on vacation. But in July, I decided to prove them wrong. I planned my first solo camping trip to Alaska. What happened in those remote mountains changed everything I thought I knew about being alone in the wilderness. Because sometimes being alone isn't the real danger. It's the people who are watching and waiting for someone exactly like you. I chose Wrangell St. Elias National Park because it's huge and wild. 6 million acres of mountains, glaciers, and valleys where you can hike for days without seeing another person. That's exactly what I wanted, to prove I could handle myself without anyone else around. I packed my brown UPS truck with camping gear and drove north for 3 days, taking the Alaska Highway through Canada. The park ranger at the visitor center was friendly but serious. She marked my route on the topographic map and made sure I had the right permits. "You hiking alone?" she asked, looking at my paperwork. When I nodded, she frowned a little. "Make sure you check in when you get back. We've had a few solo hikers go missing this summer. Probably just changed their plans and forgot to tell us, but still." She handed me a satellite communicator device. "This only works in some areas, but it's better than nothing." I felt confident driving to the trailhead. My truck was loaded with a week's worth of food, a good tent, fishing gear, and all the safety equipment I'd researched online. I'd studied the area for months, walked, had YouTube videos, read survival guides. How hard could it be? The first 3 days were perfect. The weather was clear, the hiking trails were well marked, and I caught enough trout to supplement my freeze-dried meals. At night, I'd sit by my campfire and feel proud of myself. I was doing it, surviving alone in one of the most remote places in North America. I called my mom using the satellite communicator just to check in, and she sounded surprised that I was doing so well. On the 4th morning, I hiked down to a stream about 2 miles from my camp. The fishing there was supposed to be excellent according to the guidebook. I found a good spot where the water was deep and slow-moving, perfect for trout. I'd been casting for maybe an hour when I heard someone shouting from across the water. "Help! Please help me!" I looked up and saw a man on the other side of the stream, maybe 50 yards away. He was waving his arms frantically. Even from that distance, I could see he was hurt. He was limping and holding his side like he was in pain. "I'm injured," he called out. "I've been walking for hours. I need help." My first thought was that this guy had been hiking alone too, just like me. Maybe he'd fallen or gotten attacked by a bear. The stream was only about waist deep, and I was a strong swimmer. I could get across easily. "Hold on," I shouted back. "I'm coming." I left my fishing rod on the bank and started wading across the stream. The water was freezing cold, probably snowmelt from the mountains. The current was stronger than it looked, and I had to fight to keep my balance on the slippery rocks. As I got closer to the other side, I could see the man more clearly. He was maybe 40 years old, wearing hiking clothes that looked expensive. But something felt weird. He'd stopped limping, and he wasn't holding his side anymore. He was just standing there, watching me struggle through the water. When I was about 10 feet away from the bank, 2 other people stepped out from behind some bushes. A woman in medical scrubs and another man carrying what looked like a small briefcase. That's when I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. "Thanks for coming over," the first man said, smiling. "This makes things so much easier." I tried to turn around and get back to the water, but the woman was faster. She jabbed something into my neck, a needle attached to a syringe. I felt the medicine go into my bloodstream immediately. My vision got blurry, my legs felt like rubber, and I couldn't coordinate my movements anymore. "Don't worry," the woman said as I collapsed onto the rocky shore. "You'll be helping a lot of people very soon." The last thing I remembered was being dragged through the forest by my arms while my legs wouldn't work at all. I woke up lying on my back under bright white lights. My head was pounding and my mouth tasted like metal. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't move. Thick leather straps held my wrists, ankles, and chest to what looked like an operating table. I was in some kind of medical facility. White walls, stainless steel equipment, the smell of disinfectant. But it didn't feel like a hospital. There were no windows, no emergency exits I could see, and everything was too quiet. Hospital machines usually beep and hum constantly. This place was almost silent. I tried to call for help, but only a weak whisper came out. My throat felt numb, like when you get dental work done and the Novocaine affects your whole mouth. I could barely make any sound at all. "You're awake. Good." A man in green surgical scrubs walked over to my table. He had a clipboard and was looking at me like I was a piece of equipment instead of a person. "I'm Dr. Reynolds. You're going to help save some lives today." I tried to ask what was happening, but I still couldn't speak properly. My vocal cords weren't working. "The paralytic we used affects your voice and motor control, but you can still hear and think clearly," Dr. Reynolds explained. "That's intentional. We need you conscious so your organs stay as fresh as possible." He showed me the clipboard. It had my name at the top and a list of body parts with prices next to them. Kidneys, $200,000 each. Liver, $300,000. Heart, $400,000. Corneas, bone marrow, skin grafts. Even those had dollar amounts. "You're a perfect donor," he continued. 30 years old, excellent physical condition, no smoking or drinking based on your blood tests. Your organs are already sold to patients who've been waiting months for compatible matches. I looked around the room and felt sick. There were other operating tables with people strapped to them, just like me. All of them were awake but couldn't move or speak. Some looked like they'd already been operated on. Bandages on their sides where kidneys had been removed or tubes going into their chests. But they were still alive, being kept in good condition for future surgeries. "We've been running this operation for 5 years, Dr. Reynolds said, like he was proud of it. "We target solo hikers and campers in remote areas, people like you who don't check in regularly with family or friends. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, we've already harvested what we need and disposed of the evidence." A nurse came over and started drawing lines on my body with a marker, showing where they planned to make cuts. She marked around my kidneys, across my chest for heart removal, around my eyes for the corneas. "We monitor social media posts, camping permits, trail registers," Dr. Reynolds continued. "We look for people hiking alone in areas where they won't be found quickly. The injured hiker trick works almost every time. People want to be heroes." I tried to move my fingers to test whether the paralytic drug was wearing off at all. I could barely feel my fingertips, but there was some sensation coming back. "Why?" "Our buyers are already on their way," the nurse said. "A businessman in Japan needs your kidneys. A senator's wife needs your liver. Your heart is going to a tech billionaire who didn't want to wait on the official transplant list." I could hear them preparing surgical instruments on metal trays, scalpels, clamps, saws. The sound made my stomach turn, but I couldn't even throw up because my throat muscles weren't working. Over the next hour, while they prepared for surgery, I slowly worked on testing my muscle control. The drug was definitely wearing off, but very gradually. I could move my toes a little bit. My fingers could twitch slightly, but I was still basically paralyzed. A nurse leaned over me to adjust my IV line. I managed to grab her stethoscope with my right hand. My grip was weak, but it was enough to wrap the rubber tubing around her throat. She made a choking sound and tried to pull away, but I held on as tight as I could. The other medical staff rushed over to help her, but I used her body to shield myself while I worked on the restraint buckles with my other hand. "Sedate him again!" Dr. Reynolds shouted, but I kicked the syringe out of his hand with my newly freed leg. I stumbled toward what looked like an exit, still dragging the nurse. My legs weren't working right, but adrenaline was helping me move. I made it through a door and found myself outside. The medical facility was actually a collection of small buildings connected by covered walkways. I was on some kind of remote airstrip. There was a helicopter and 2 small planes parked on a paved runway. Mountains surrounded us on all sides. I let go of the nurse and tried to run toward the planes, but my legs gave out after a few steps. I crawled toward the nearest aircraft, hoping I could figure out how to start it, or at least use its radio. The plane was locked, but there was a small building next to the runway that looked like an air traffic control station. I broke a window with a rock and climbed inside. The radio equipment was old, but still working. I found a frequency guide, too. Aped to the wall and started broadcasting on emergency channels. "Mayday, mayday, this is Tom Mitchell. I'm being held at an illegal organ harvesting facility. I need immediate help. I'm at a remote airstrip surrounded by mountains, probably in Alaska near Wrangell St. Elias National Park." I kept repeating the message while looking through the paperwork scattered around the radio room. There were lists of victims with their organ compatibility information, flight schedules for transporting body parts, and payment records from buyers all over the world. Through the window, I could see the medical team coming after me. They had tranquilizer guns instead of regular weapons. They needed me alive because dead organs lose their value quickly. I barricaded the door with a desk and kept broadcasting my location. "There are other victims here being kept alive for organ removal. This is an active crime scene. I repeat, I need immediate rescue." After what felt like forever, I heard helicopters in the distance. Real rescue helicopters, not the medical transport chopper on the airstrip. Alaska state troopers and FBI agents surrounded the facility within minutes. They found 12 other victims strapped to operating tables, some of whom had already had organs removed but were being kept alive for future surgeries. The investigation revealed that this operation had killed over 60 people in 5 years. They specifically targeted healthy outdoor enthusiasts because their organs sold for premium prices to wealthy buyers who didn't want to wait on official transplant lists. The facility had everything needed for a complete organ harvesting business: surgical suites, preservation equipment, transportation systems for shipping organs worldwide, and connections to corrupt medical facilities that would transplant the organs with no questions asked. Dr. Reynolds and his team had made over $15 million selling organs from hikers, campers, and other solo travelers. They got life sentences in federal prison, but investigators believe there are similar operations in other remote areas targeting people who travel alone. I spent 3 weeks recovering in an Anchorage hospital from the drugs they'd given me and the psychological trauma of nearly being butchered alive. Several of the other victims didn't survive the rescue because they'd already had too many organs removed to keep living. I still work for UPS, but I never go anywhere alone anymore. I always tell multiple people exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. I learned that organ trafficking is a real threat to people who travel solo in places where help might not come quickly. The experience taught me that sometimes the wilderness isn't the most dangerous thing about being alone in remote areas. It's the people who see solo travelers as walking organ banks worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're out there, watching and waiting, ready to help you in your moment of need. My name is Carlos Martinez, and I've been working construction in Las Vegas for 12 years. I've built hotels, casinos, apartment buildings, you name it. The desert heat, the long hours, the physical demands, none of that bothers me anymore. I'm tough, I work hard, and I save my money for the things that matter to me. Every September, I take a hunting trip somewhere remote. It's my way of getting away from the noise and chaos of the city. Last September, I decided to do something different. Instead of hunting deer in Nevada or elk in Colorado like I usually do, I booked a caribou hunt in Alaska. The North Slope, way up near the Arctic Ocean. It's about as far from Las Vegas as you can get. Endless tundra, no roads, no people for hundreds of miles. Perfect for what I needed. I'd been planning this trip for 2 years, saving up the money and getting all the right gear. Cold weather hunting is serious business. One mistake, and you're dead. I bought a heavy-duty sleeping bag rated for -40 degrees, a reliable GPS unit, extra batteries for everything, and enough food for 8 days, even though I was only planning to be out there for 5. My hunting rifle was a .300 Winchester Magnum, powerful enough to drop a caribou cleanly at long range. The bush plane pilot who flew me in was named Dave. He'd been flying hunters into remote areas for 23 years. As we flew over the tundra, he pointed out landmarks, a frozen lake here, a river bend there. "You sure you want to be dropped off this far from everything?" he asked me. "Most guys want to be closer to a cabin or at least a marked trail." I told him I wanted the real experience. Complete isolation. Just me, the wilderness, and whatever caribou I could find. Dave shrugged and said he'd pick me up in 5 days at the same spot. "Keep your emergency beacon close," he warned. "Weather can change fast up here, and if something goes wrong, we need to know about it right away." He dropped me off on a small rise that gave me a good view of the surrounding area. The silence after the plane left was incredible. In Las Vegas, there's always noise, traffic, construction, people. Up here, the only sound was the wind moving through the grass. I set up my camp about 100 yards from where Dave had left me, in a spot that was sheltered, but still gave me a good view. The first day was perfect. I spent most of it just getting used to the environment and glassing the area with my binoculars. The tundra looks empty until you really start looking. Then you see movement everywhere. Arctic foxes, ground squirrels, birds I couldn't identify. And in the distance, maybe 3 miles away, I spotted my first caribou herd. They were moving slowly across a valley, maybe 40 or 50 animals. Even through my binoculars, I could tell they were healthy and well-fed. Perfect. I marked their location on my GPS and planned my approach for the next morning. That night, sleeping in my tent, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. This was exactly what I needed. No deadlines, no supervisors, no city stress. Just me and the wilderness. The second day is when things started to get strange. I woke up before dawn and hiked toward where I'd seen the caribou herd. It took me almost 2 hours to get close enough for a shot, moving carefully and staying downwind. When I finally found them, they were grazing peacefully in a small valley maybe 200 yards away. I set up my rifle on its bipod and started picking out the best target. That's when I noticed something odd. Most of the caribou were grazing normally, heads down, moving slowly through the grass. But one caribou, standing slightly apart from the others, was perfectly still, and it was looking directly at me. At first I thought maybe it had caught my scent or heard something. Caribou have good senses and they're naturally cautious. But as I watched it through my rifle scope, something felt wrong. The way it was standing, the way it was looking at me, it didn't seem like normal animal behavior. I've hunted for 15 years. I know how animals behave when they sense danger. They get nervous, they look around, they stamp their feet or twitch their ears. This caribou wasn't doing any of that. It was just standing there staring at me with what looked like intelligence, like it knew exactly what I was and what I was planning to do. Through my scope, I could see its eyes clearly. They looked wrong somehow, too aware, too human. I lowered my rifle to glass the herd with my binoculars. When I looked back to where the strange caribou had been standing, it was gone. The rest of the herd was still there, still grazing peacefully, but that one animal had just disappeared. I spent the rest of the morning trying to get a shot at one of the other caribou, but something had spooked them. They kept moving, never staying in one place long enough for me to get a clean shot. Finally, around noon, I gave up and decided to try a different area. As I hiked to a new location, I kept seeing caribou in the distance. Always single animals, never part of a herd, and always watching me. I'd spot one on a ridge about half a mile away, standing motionless while I walked. When I'd stop to look at it through my binoculars, it would be gone by the time I got the lenses focused. This happened 6 or 7 times throughout the day. Each time, the caribou was in a different location, but it looked exactly the same. Same size, same coloring, same strange behavior. It was impossible for one animal to move that fast across the tundra, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the same caribou following me. By evening, I was starting to feel uncomfortable. I'm not easily spooked, but something about the way that animal, or those animals, kept watching me didn't feel right. I made camp in a different spot, about 3 miles from where I'd started the day, and settled in for the night. That's when I heard the calls. I was sitting by my small campfire, cleaning my rifle, when I heard caribou vocalizations coming from the darkness beyond the firelight. Caribou make different sounds, grunts, clicks, sometimes what sounds like barking. These calls sounded normal at first, but as I listened, they became more complex, more purposeful. It sounded like the animal was trying to communicate something specific. The calls had a rhythm to them, almost like a conversation. But there was only one animal making the sounds. I grabbed my headlamp and shined it toward the noise. About 30 yards away, at the very edge of the light beam, I could see what looked like a caribou. But something was wrong with its posture. It was standing upright on its hind legs like a person. The sight was so strange that for a moment I couldn't process what I was seeing. Caribou don't stand like that. They can rear up on their hind legs for a few seconds, but they can't balance there. This animal was standing completely upright, perfectly balanced, still making those strange calling sounds. When my light hit it directly, it dropped to all fours and ran away. But its movement was wrong too. Too coordinated, too purposeful. It wasn't running like a panicked animal. It was running like something that had been caught doing something it shouldn't be doing. I grabbed my rifle and searched the area, but whatever it was had vanished. What I found instead made my blood run cold. Tracks. Starting where the animal had been standing, I could see clear caribou hoof prints in the soft ground. But as I followed them with my flashlight, they began to change. The hooves gradually became smaller, rounder. The gait changed from 4 legs to 2. By the time I'd followed them about 50 yards, they were clearly human footprints. I've seen a lot of animal tracks in my hunting career. I know what I'm looking at. These tracks showed a gradual transformation from caribou hooves to human feet. The change wasn't sudden. It happened slowly, over the course of maybe 30 steps. Like whatever made them was slowly changing shape as it ran. The human tracks led to a small hill about 100 yards from my camp. At the top of the hill, they just stopped. Not like the person had jumped or climbed something. They just ended, like whatever made them had disappeared into thin air. I followed them 3 times with my flashlight, making sure I wasn't seeing things. Each time the result was the same. Caribou hooves gradually becoming human feet, then nothing. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept my rifle loaded and my headlamp within reach. Every sound made me jump. The wind through the grass sounded like footsteps. Distant bird calls sounded like voices. When morning came, I found something that made me want to pack up and leave immediately. My rifle had been moved during the night. I always prop my rifle against a specific rock next to my sleeping bag when I go to sleep, with the barrel pointing toward the sky. It's a safety habit I've had for years, but when I woke up, the rifle was positioned differently. It was still propped against the same rock, but now it was pointing directly at my sleeping bag, like someone had carefully repositioned it to aim at where my head had been while I slept. I examined the ground around my tent and found them immediately. Human footprints, bare feet, adult-sized, coming right up to my tent and circling it completely. Someone, or something, had walked around my camp multiple times while I was sleeping, handling my rifle and possibly watching me. I was done with this hunting trip. I started packing my gear immediately. I'd been in dangerous situations before. Construction sites can be deadly if you're not careful. But this was different. This felt predatory. Like something was hunting me instead of the other way around. As I packed, I could see a caribou atching me from a ridge about half a mile away. It was standing in the same unnatural pose I'd seen the night before, perfectly still, perfectly upright on its hind legs. Even at that distance, I could feel it watching me. I hiked to a new location about 5 miles away and set up a basic camp. I wasn't planning to hunt anymore. I just wanted to wait for my pickup in 2 days and get the hell out of there. But I wasn't going to give up completely. I set up my trail camera, a motion-activated camera I used to monitor game trails, pointing toward my tent. If something was stalking me, I wanted proof. That second night was worse than the first. I heard footsteps around my tent. Not animal hooves, human footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling my camp. I lay in my sleeping bag with my pistol in my hand, listening to whatever it was walk around and around my tent. The steps were too measured, too careful to be from someone who was lost or confused. This felt intentional. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and my pistol and unzipped my tent. Standing about 10 feet away was a naked man. He looked Inuit, but something was wrong with his proportions. He was too tall, maybe 7 feet, with arms and legs that seemed slightly too long for his body. His skin had a grayish color, like old leather, and when my flashlight hit his eyes, they reflected the light like an animal's. They glowed green in the darkness. We stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching me. His face was expressionless, but those glowing eyes never left mine. Then he opened his mouth and made the same caribou calls I'd been hearing for 2 nights. "Get away from here," I yelled, raising my pistol. "Get away from my camp." The man turned and started running, but he didn't run like a human. As soon as he started moving, he hopped to all fours, and his gait changed to the 4-legged gallop of a caribou. I watched in horror as his body seemed to shift and change while he ran. By the time he reached the edge of my flashlight beam, he had transformed completely into a caribou and disappeared into the darkness. I sat outside my tent for the rest of the night with my pistol ready, but nothing else happened. When dawn came, I checked my trail camera immediately. The footage made my blood run cold. The video showed a caribou approaching my camp around midnight, but as it got closer to my tent, it began to change. The transformation took about 10 minutes, with the creature's bones seeming to stretch and reshape as fur gradually disappeared and became skin. The process was smooth but disturbing to watch. By the end of the video, a naked human figure was standing where the caribou had been. The video was clear and undeniable. I had captured actual footage of something changing from an animal into a human being. I watched it 5 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Each time, the result was the same. This thing, whatever it was, could change its shape at will. I packed immediately and activated my emergency beacon. I didn't care about the hunting trip anymore. I didn't care about the money I'd spent. I wanted out of there right now. While I waited for the rescue plane, I could see caribou watching me from the surrounding hills. But now, I couldn't tell which ones were real animals and which ones might be something else. Some of them were standing in positions that real caribou never would, perfectly upright, too still, too focused on me. Their behavior seemed coordinated, like they were communicating with each other. When Dave's plane finally arrived, I was never so happy to see another human being in my life. As we took off, I looked down at the tundra and saw at least a dozen caribou scattered across the landscape below. They were all looking up at the plane. During the flight back to Fairbanks, Dave told me he'd heard similar stories from other hunters in remote areas of Alaska. "The old Inuit have legends about creatures like that," he said. "They call them different names, but they all describe the same thing: beings that can take any animal form, but prefer to mimic caribou because it lets them get close to humans." He said the legends claimed these shapeshifters were ancient, that they'd been in Alaska long before humans arrived. They supposedly studied people by taking our form, learning our weaknesses and behaviors for reasons no one understood. When I got back to Las Vegas, I took the trail camera footage to wildlife biologists at UNLV. They couldn't explain what they were seeing. The transformation violated everything known about biology and physics, but the video evidence was undeniable. One professor suggested it might be an unknown species with advanced camouflage abilities, but he couldn't explain how an animal could physically reshape its bone structure. I started researching online and found disturbing connections. Several hunters had disappeared in areas of Alaska where shapeshifter encounters were reported. Their camps were found empty with no signs of struggle, like they had simply vanished. Search and rescue teams found no trace of them. I still hunt, but never alone and never in remote areas. I stick to guided hunts with other people, places where there are roads and cell phone service. Because I know now that there are things in Alaska's wilderness that can become anything they want to be. And we have no way of telling what's real and what's watching us with intelligence that isn't human. Sometimes when I'm working construction in Las Vegas, I'll see a stray dog or a bird acting strangely, standing too still, watching too intently. And I wonder if those things from Alaska can travel, if they can take forms other than caribou. I wonder if they're still studying us, still learning our weaknesses. I keep that trail cams, era footage on my phone. Sometimes I show it to people I trust, people who need to know that there are things in this world that science can't explain. Most don't believe it, even with the video evidence. They think it's fake, computer-generated. But I know what I saw. I know what's out there. And I know I'll never hunt alone in the wilderness again. My name is David Martinez, and I've been working as an electrician in Portland for 11 years now. I got into this trade right after high school because I loved working with my hands and solving problems. Over the years, I've wired everything from small apartments to huge office buildings. But my real passion has always been caving. I've been exploring unmapped cave systems across the Pacific Northwest since I was 20. There's something about being the first person to see places that have been hidden underground for thousands of years. What I found in Alaska last July changed everything I thought I knew about what lies beneath our feet. I specialize in technical cave exploration, the kind where you need ropes, climbing gear, and a lot of experience to get out alive. Most cavers stick to the popular tourist caves, but I'm drawn to the places no one has ever mapped. The danger is part of it, sure, but mostly it's about discovery. Finding chambers that have never seen human light, underground rivers that don't appear on any survey. I've explored over 40 unmapped systems across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. I thought I'd seen everything caves could throw at me. In July, I planned a solo expedition to Alaska. I'd been reading geological surveys of the Tongass National Forest, and they mentioned extensive limestone cave networks that had never been properly explored. The area was remote, 15 miles from the nearest hiking trail, which meant I'd probably be the first person to set foot in whatever system I found. I packed 3 weeks' worth of supplies, all my technical climbing gear, and enough battery power to keep my lights running for days underground. The flight to Ketchikan was routine. I rented a truck and drove as far as the logging roads would take me, then hiked the rest of the way with a 70-pound pack. The weather was perfect. Ear skies and temperatures in the mid-60s. After 2 days of hiking through dense forest, I found what I was looking for behind a small waterfall about a mile off the main ridge. The cave entrance was massive, easily 20 feet wide and 12 feet tall, like walking through the front doors of a cathedral. Most cave entrances are tight squeezes that open up once you get inside, but this looked like it had been designed for easy access. The rock around the opening was smooth limestone, worn by centuries of water flow. But there was something else. Carved symbols around the entrance that definitely weren't natural. I set up my base camp about 50 yards from the entrance and spent the afternoon checking my gear. Headlamp, backup lights, extra batteries, climbing rope, harnesses, first aid kit, emergency radio, everything an experienced caver needs to stay safe underground. The symbols around the entrance bothered me, though. They were geometric patterns cut deep into the stone, triangles within circles, connected by straight lines that hurt to look at directly. Like some kind of optical illusion designed to make you dizzy. The next morning, I geared up and rappelled down the entrance shaft. My headlamp beam disappeared into darkness below, which meant the chamber was bigger than anything I'd explored before. When I reached the bottom, I found myself standing in a space so large my light couldn't reach the walls in any direction. The floor was covered in fine sand, and the air smelled clean and dry, not the musty dampness you usually find in caves. I started mapping the chamber, taking compass readings and measuring distances. That's when I noticed the wall carvings. The same geometric symbols from the entrance were carved into the rock everywhere I looked. But these weren't random scratches. They were arranged in rows and columns like written text. I'd never seen anything like them in any cave system. They looked almost mathematical, with precise angles and measurements that would have required serious planning to create. As I explored deeper, I realized the cave system was far more extensive than any geological survey had indicated. The main chamber connected to at least 6 different passages, each one leading into darkness. But here's what really bothered me. The passages were perfectly straight and round, like they'd been bored by massive machinery. Natural caves follow water flow and rock fractures. They twist and turn and change size constantly. These tunnels were engineered. I chose the largest passage and followed it for about 200 yards. It opened into another chamber, this one filled with what looked like fossilized remains embedded in the walls. But when I examined them closely, I realized these weren't normal animal bones. The skeletons looked almost human, but wrong. Too many ribs, extra joints in the arms and legs, skulls that were the right size but the wrong shape, like someone had taken human anatomy and modified it. The passage continued beyond the fossil chamber, leading to more rooms carved directly from the living rock. Some contained stone structures built without mortar, blocks fitted so perfectly together I couldn't slide my knife blade between them. The construction was flawless, better than anything I'd seen in modern buildings. And everywhere, more of those geometric symbols carved into walls and arranged on stone tablets. I was about 2 miles into the system when I heard the first sound that didn't belong underground. A low humming, like electrical equipment running. I followed the sound through a series of smaller passages until I found chambers filled with modern equipment that had no business being miles underground in an unmapped cave system. There were computers, generators, and scientific instruments that someone had transported through passages barely wide enough for a person. The equipment was powered by geothermal generators tapped into underground hot springs. His wasn't some abandoned research station. Everything was running. Displays showing data, fans cooling electronic equipment. Someone was operating a permanent facility down here. I found laboratories with steel tables, surgical equipment, and rows of preservation tanks filled with biological specimens. Some contained deformed animals, rats with extra limbs, birds with human-like hands instead of wings. Other tanks held what looked like human body parts suspended in clear fluid, and some tanks contained living specimens that moved when my light hit them, pressing themselves against the glass like they were trying to get out. The facility extended through dozens of chambers connected by both natural caves and artificially expanded tunnels. I found living quarters with beds, kitchens, and supply rooms stocked with months' worth of food and equipment. Dozens of people were apparently living permanently underground, operating some kind of research facility that didn't exist on any map. In one of the computer rooms, I discovered surveillance footage from cameras positioned throughout Alaska's wilderness areas. The screens showed live feeds from hiking trails, campsites, and remote areas where people went missing every year. They were monitoring everywhere that solo hikers and climbers like me might go. I found files on missing hikers with detailed biological profiles, medical histories, and genetic information. Photos of people who'd disappeared over the past decade, along with notes about their physical condition and suitability for various experiments. The facility appeared to be some kind of research operation focused on studying and experimenting on people who ventured into remote areas where no one would look for them. While I was reading through the files, I heard footsteps and voices approaching from deeper in the cave system. I quickly shut down the computer and hid behind a bank of equipment. 3 people in lab coats emerged from a tunnel discussing subjects and harvest schedules like they were talking about livestock. But these weren't normal researchers. They moved with mechanical precision, never stumbling or hesitating in the dim light. Their voices had an odd, artificial quality, like synthesized speech trying to sound human. When one of them turned toward my hiding spot, I saw that his skin had a waxy plastic appearance under the fluorescent lights. I waited until they moved on, then tried to backtrack toward the cave entrance. But the passages I'd used to get here were now sealed with stone blocks that hadn't been there before. The cave system was apparently designed to trap people, with remote controls that could seal off escape routes. I was stuck miles underground with people who weren't quite people, conducting experiments on human subjects. I found alternate routes through maintenance tunnels that led past more laboratories. I saw surgical equipment designed for procedures that would be impossible in normal medical facilities. Restraint systems built into operating tables. Devices that looked like medieval torture instruments updated with modern electronics. Some chambers contained holding cells carved directly into the rock walls, with heavy steel doors and no windows. I discovered journals written by previous victims who'd been kept alive for months while being subjected to various experiments. The entries described medical procedures combined with psychological torture designed to test the limits of human endurance. People who'd come to Alaska for adventure, like me, and disappeared into this underground nightmare. In a communications chamber, I found radio equipment connected to external antennas. I managed to broadcast a distress signal on emergency frequencies, giving my GPS coordinates and describing what I'd found. Then I heard more footsteps approaching, so I grabbed one of the journals as evidence and ran for the tunnels. I spent 6 hours crawling through maintenance passage, following air currents toward what I hoped was another exit. My batteries were running low and my emergency supplies were almost gone when I heard helicopters overhead. The FBI had responded to my distress signal and brought a full tactical team. They rappelled into the cave system and found the most extensive underground operation they'd ever encountered. The facility was evacuated, but many of the researchers escaped through deeper tunnels that extended far beyond what investigators could explore safely. The chambers I'd seen were apparently just the surface level of something much larger. Dozens of victims were found alive in the holding cells, some who'd been missing for years. The rescued survivors described being used for medical experiments that tested the limits of human physical and psychological endurance. The government investigators classified most details about the facility, but confirmed it was connected to similar underground operations across the country. The cave entrance was permanently sealed with concrete and steel barriers. But I know there are other entrances to similar facilities throughout Alaska's wilderness areas. The surveillance system I found was monitoring hundreds of remote locations where people go missing every year. I learned that some missing hikers aren't lost in the wilderness. They're taken underground to places where human experimentation continues away from any oversight or accountability. Places where things that look almost human conduct research on people who ventured too far from civilization. I still work as an electrician in Portland, but I don't go caving anymore. Every time I see a missing hiker report from Alaska, I wonder if they found one of those other entrances. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that mechanical humming sound and remember the way those artificial voices discussed their human subjects. A journal I took from the facility is locked in a safe deposit box, along with photos I managed to take before my camera battery died. Insurance, in case anyone ever tries to claim that place didn't exist. Because I know there are more facilities out there hidden beneath our feet waiting for the next solo adventurer who wanders too far from the marked trails.